So we're wonderful things, and consciousness is a wonderful thing, but it's maybe not quite as wonderful as it seems to us. Just as it seemed to astronomers that we were at the center of the universe and that everything went round the Earth, so it seems to us that the core of reality that we're really sure of is private and in our own minds. And that's a dimension of reality that science has to expand somehow in order to account for, that demonstrates the limits of science. I think that's inflating our importance and trusting our own self-conception too much. And it's like a magic. Magic tricks are powerful and potent things. They entertain us, they delight us, they amuse us, they puzzle us. We enjoy seeing magic tricks, seeing illusions, and they have an effect on us, but they aren't really magical, and we can explain the mechanisms behind them. And when we do, it's kind of a bit disappointing sometimes. And so I think maybe the scientific story might in that sense seem disappointing to some people, but still the effect is there. We can still enjoy the effect, even when we know it's a trick. No one goes to see a magician levitating, whatever, and thinks, yes, they really are levitating. And if they weren't, I would be disappointed. They know it's a trick, but it's still wonderful. It's still a fantastic experience. I'd say the same about consciousness. It doesn't have to be really magical to have the magical power that it has, to be as wonderful as we ordinarily take it to be. It's just that it's not, we just don't have to take the magic, as Dan would say, as real magic.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Wandering Thoughts. Today I'm joined by Professor Keith Frankish. Professor Keith, welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you and to learn from you. I think to begin with, it would be good to tell us a little bit about yourself and also about your area of expertise.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Kyriakos. Well, a little bit about myself. Well, I describe myself as a philosopher, and I spend most of my time doing philosophy and writing philosophy, particularly philosophy of mind, and particularly within philosophy of mind, philosophy of consciousness. Though I have other interests as well. And I defend a view about consciousness, which some people think is quite radical, but which I think is not radical at all. I think it is Daniel Dennett who held a similar view, or rather I hold a similar view to the one he held, described it as the obvious default theory of consciousness. And so I see it that way too. It's a view that treats consciousness as quite a wonderful and wonderful feature of human life, but not as something magical or requiring us to deposit a new dimension of reality in order to account for it. So it's a naturalistic view of consciousness.
When you say naturalistic, what's the definition of naturalistic?
Well, very good question. Yes, perhaps I shouldn't have introduced such a loaded term so early, because there are lots of different definitions of what it means. What I mean by it, whether this is a good definition of naturalistic or not, I don't know, but this is what I mean when I applied it to consciousness, is that consciousness is just another feature of evolved biological organisms that performs a certain function and can be explained in the same way as other cognitive capacities, such as memory, emotion, reasoning, and so on. It's not something metaphysically special. Okay, so it's something that science can fully explain, put it like that. A lot of people think it isn't. They think that we need to do metaphysics, we need a special metaphysical story about consciousness, different from the story we need for other human and animal abilities. I don't.
That makes sense. So has consciousness evolved over time?
Yes, I think wherever we find design in nature or indeed in culture, it has to be the product of some sort of evolutionary process. Where else does it come from? Evolution really being something like a process of trial and error, ultimately, at its simplest. That's where complexity, that's where design comes from. And I think consciousness is a design feature of certain kinds of biological life, perhaps quite widespread feature in the living world.
How has consciousness evolved over time? How did it look like thousands of years ago to now? I don't know if I mean it's a question that I guess doesn't have, you know, a straightforward this is exactly how the answer is. But what's this study and speculation around this question?
Right. Well, that's a very good question, and I think it's the right question to ask. But it's difficult to approach, even to begin to approach it, until you have some sense of what it is that you're talking about when you're talking about consciousness. As I said, many philosophers, some scientists, think of consciousness as something. How to put this? As something that is only contingently connected with the brain and the things that, and the evolved systems that make us that constitute us as organisms. It somehow happened that at some point, biological organisms acquired an inner life of a special kind, a kind that is not explained simply by referring to their evolved capacities. Something extra happened. Now, if you think of consciousness in that way, then it's very hard to get an evolutionary story on it. What you can get an evolutionary story on is something like the neural correlates of consciousness, the brain mechanisms that go along with consciousness, that cause it, or some other way associated with consciousness. You can tell an evolutionary story about those. But the presence of consciousness itself requires some other sort of explanation. Maybe consciousness is the intrinsic nature of those brain states. That's one view. Another view is that somehow consciousness emerges from those brain states, but it's not fully explained in terms of them. Now, if you think of it like that, it's hard to get an evolutionary purchase on consciousness itself. Okay, so you first, I think, need to argue for the kind of position that I was sketching at the beginning, that consciousness is itself just an evolved biological capacity, and you can ask, well, what's it for? And how did it evolve? Why was there selectional pressure for it, and so on? But then we get into this debate about how to rethink consciousness, not as something essentially subjective, something that can't be studied by standard scientific methods. We need to reconceptualize consciousness first in order to even start asking those evolutionary questions. Though, as I say, we can, of course, from either perspective, we can talk about the evolution of the brain mechanisms that are thought to go along with it. So then I'd have to get into telling you my perspective on this reconceptualization of consciousness, and that's something I am working on. Though I've been devoting most of my time, I suppose, to arguing for the need for this reconceptualization, that we shouldn't rely on an intuitive conception of consciousness that doesn't that puts it outside the realm of scientific explanation and therefore of evolutionary explanation.
That's fascinating. So can you talk to us about, well, two things. One is the need of the reconceptualization of consciousness, and also what's the new concept of consciousness that you're thinking we should be proposing?
Okay. Okay, so one way to approach this is to contrast two perspectives. Okay, so let's say I take a sip of this coffee, and I have a taste experience, a conscious experience of the taste of the coffee. Okay. Now, we can look at that from two perspectives. One is from my first-person perspective, my subjective perspective. You can ask me to describe the experience, to say what it was like. I'm not a very sophisticated coffee drinker, so I couldn't tell you all that much about it, but it tastes like coffee normally tastes. It's rather sweet. And so on. A more coffee taster will be able to give you a much richer description of the experience, I suppose. But that's how the experience seemed to me. Okay. Subjectively. Another story would be one that another person could tell about the experience. just a layperson observing, we wouldn't be able to say much, but someone who had studied the science of taste and the neuroscience of taste would be able to tell quite a complicated story about taste receptors and smell receptors, which play a big role in taste perception, being activated. Different brain regions that these sent signals to, and how those signals were processed, and the effects of all this, and ultimately how that culminated with my saying that it tasted of coffee and tasted sweet and so on. But at no point in that would they mention the sort of the first person aspect, the quality, the coffee taste. They would just talk about receptors firing and about nerve fibers and about processing in different regions of the sensory cortex and whatever, and how this information about the coffee was made available to language, the language centers and so on, enabling me to report it, and so on and so on. And similarly, when I give my first person description, I don't mention anything about my about any of that neuroscientific stuff. I don't mention my brain or anything like that. I don't say my brain detected the coffee. I say it tasted like this. So I have these two different perspectives. Now, fair enough. We have different perspectives on all sorts of things. You could describe my laptop in different ways. You could describe it there for its micro components. You could describe it at a sort of functional level of what it does and so on. We describe all sorts of things in different ways, no problem. But it seems when it comes to consciousness that these two perspectives don't mesh together quite so neatly. It seems that this first person aspect just isn't just a shorthand way of describing the same things that the neuroscientist is describing. It seems to be describing another whole dimension of reality that is only available to me, only accessible to me, to the subject, and that will forever escape scientific investigation. No matter how much the scientists knew about what was happening in my brain when I tasted the coffee, they would never really be able to sort of pin down the exact taste as it was, as I experienced it. That is just for me. The quality somehow doesn't get into the scientific picture. I think that's, and that leads a lot of people to think, yes, well, we need to tell some extra story over and above the scientific story in order to account for consciousness. We need to posit some new kinds of facts that come into existence, new properties that come into existence at certain points in both, I suppose, evolution and development, when things begin to have this inner life to them that is present for the things themselves. One view that's increasingly popular is that perhaps all of physical reality has this inner aspect. Is a panpsychist view that even that the fundamental constituents of the physical world have a little inner subjective life, as it were, and that our rich, complex consciousnesses are formed from the combination of all the little inner lives of all the bits all the subatomic particles that compose our brains. But anyway, you seem to need to tell some extra story. That's the intuition. Now that's what I resist. Okay, my thought is, well, yes, I can understand why it seems that way to people, why they have this powerful intuition that there's something extra. And that needs explaining, why we have this intuition. But I don't think we should trust it. I think it's giving too much credit to our own self-conception. Okay, so we're wonderful things, and consciousness is a wonderful thing, but it's maybe not quite as wonderful as it seems to us. Just as it seemed to, maybe a slightly unfair comparison, it seemed to previous astronomers that we were at the center of the universe, and that everything went round. That the Earth was at the center of the universe, and everything went round the Earth. So it seems to us that reality is really the core of reality that we really can be really sure of is private in our own minds, and that's a dimension of reality that science has to expand somehow, or in order to account for, that demonstrates the limits of science. I think that's over. That's inflating our importance and trusting our own self-conception too much. So, and of course, once you introduce this other this idea of another dimension, another set of facts that are only contingently related to the physical facts, the facts that science can detect and theorize about, then we have a big problem of relating this private world of consciousness to the physical world. We've got sort of two realms now, the mental and the physical, and this is a problem, of course, that goes right back to Descartes and substance dualism. If there's a soul separate from the brain, how do the two interact? Well, modern consciousness theorists don't think of consciousness as a separate thing. They think of it as a separate aspect of the brain, but still one that isn't fully accounted for in terms of the properties of the brain that are available for scientific description. So you still have this extra dimension of reality. And how does it mesh with the physical reality? And in a way, one danger of that is that this non-physical aspect, if you like, it's the danger is that it's going to have no work to do, because it's quite plausible to think that science will be able to account for all of our behavior, all of our responses, all of our thoughts and reactions and so on in neuroscientific terms. So it will be able to explain why I said what I said about the coffee and why I reacted as I did when I stubbed my toe on the table or whatever, on the table leg. It'll be able to explain everything that happens in us without mentioning this realm, these non-physical realm. And in that case, it's sort of consciousness becomes a fifth wheel, a sort of a functionless add-on. And that doesn't seem a very that doesn't seem a serious enough view about consciousness. Pain and taste and things, these matter to us. These have an effect on us. But then if they're going to, then they must be part of that picture. We must integrate. And the only way to do that, I think, is to drop this intuition of distinctness. So I spend a lot of time, various ways, trying to motivate this view. It was a central theme in the work of Dan Dennett, who was in many ways my mentor. He spent a lot of time presenting many very powerful and, to me, convincing arguments for this view. But the intuition is stubborn. And I'm just continuing to try to chip away at it in various ways. It's not so much a matter of providing deductive arguments set from clear premises. It's because what you're trying to do is to get people to see that they shouldn't trust a certain intuition, a certain starting point. And so it's more a matter of saying to people, look, you don't have to look at it that way. There's another perspective on all of this that is better. So it's a matter of, as Dan did, using thought experiments or intuition pumps, as he called them, and trying to capture people's imaginations, I suppose, in a way that enables them to think of consciousness as being something very important. I'm not going to diminish the importance of consciousness. It's in a sense, it's sort of the essence of our existence. It's very important, but it's not quite as wonderfully magical as some people think. We need to, and taking away that magic from it doesn't, in my view, diminish its importance. It's its effects. I mean, it's like a magic trick. This is why I use the term illusion. I use consciousness as involving an illusion, not as being an illusion, but involving an illusion. And it's like a magic trick. Magic tricks are powerful and potent things. They entertain us. They delight us. They amuse us. They puzzle us. We enjoy seeing magic tricks, seeing illusions. They have an effect on us. But they aren't really magical, and we can explain the mechanisms behind them. And when we do, it's kind of a bit disappointing sometimes. And so I think maybe the scientific story might, in that sense, seem disappointing to some people. But still, the effect is there. We can still enjoy the effect, even when we know it's a trick. No one, I guess, goes to see a magician levitating, whatever, and thinks, yes, they really are levitating. And if they weren't, I would be disappointed. They know it's a trick, but it's still wonderful. It's still a fantastic experience. I'd say the same about consciousness. It doesn't have to be really magical to have the magical power that it has, to be as wonderful as we ordinarily take it to be. It's just that it's not. We just don't have to take the magic as Dan would say, as real magic. He liked to quote this line about real magic. Meaning the magic that the kind of magic that can actually be done on a stage isn't really magic. So real magic, and that's what that can actually be done, isn't really magic, but it's still wonderful.
Oh, this was a really good explanation. Just to give the audience a little bit of a of a story. Before the podcast, me and Professor Keith said I would interrupt you if you went on a tangent, but I think everything you said was very, very well connected. So I was just really enjoying listening to you. So that I thought there's no chance I'm going to interrupt you because this is really, really interesting. But I really loved what you said about conscious. It's like, it's not that consciousness is an illusion. It's a you said consciousness, it involves an illusion for us. And that definitely made me click. And I really also enjoy the aspect that you mentioned about, with the analogy that we're the center of the universe is a belief we held in the past, and now we're kind of holding on to this belief that with this thing that comes from perhaps self-importance or self-grasping, that somehow consciousness is this special magical thing for us. And I also there's so many things I like what you were saying. Another aspect that I really enjoyed was when you said when you can explain magic, it's not really magic. And I think, sorry, I'm just repeating a lot of the things you're saying, but it just helps me to kind of
sure.
ingrain them. But it's also interesting that you were saying that it doesn't make it any less special, the fact that we can explain it through cognitive science, which I think that's where a lot of people starts being like they start feeling, oh, I don't think I should subscribe to this idea. I think they just feel like, oh, it always diminishes their importance in the universe. But you're right. Just because you can explain something doesn't mean that it's not important. Okay, so this makes sense. I'm going to ask you a silly question then.
No silly questions.
So, what is consciousness?
Well, I've told you. I guess I've told you what I think it's not. Okay. So if I'm right about that, then the answer is going to it. So it's the way that I'm rejecting. Is that the word that's often used is it's an intrinsic feature of experience. It's what experience is like in itself, separate from all effects that it has. So one thought experiment that's often used to illustrate that is that of the zombie, the phenomenal zombie, which has a brain exactly like mine that does all the things that my brain does, produces all the responses that my brain does, not just the external behavior, but all the internal changes and so on. So, tracking, controlling attention, taking in information about the world, using that information to control bodily systems and behavioral responses, all of the whole gamut of things that the brain does. All of that is still being done by the phenomenal zombie's brain, but it's not like anything to be the zombie. Okay, so that's a conception of consciousness which detaches it from all psychological functions. I call it a depsychologized conception of consciousness. It's one that's not essentially tied to any psychological thing. It may be that it occurs when those psychological functions are performed. Okay, so it may be correlated with them as a matter of, there might be laws of nature that say whenever the brain performs this psychological function, it has this intrinsic field too, but there's no conceptual connection between the two. It's possible to imagine the function being performed without the field, the intrinsic field. So, in other words, you can't, this is the view I reject, you can't analyze consciousness in functional terms. Now, I reject that view. So, essentially, the opposite is, well, you can. That consciousness is something the brain does. Okay? So, it's a matter of the brain performing, or not, it could be an artificial brain, but performing certain functions. Okay, so that's the general answer, the general shape of the answer. Now, what functions? Now we get into all sorts of, and I should say that from the perspective of illusionism, which is the view that what I call phenomenal realist view, the view that takes seriously the idea that there are extra facts over and above the physical fact. I should refine that a bit, but never mind, that will do for now. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
That's so good.
What was I saying? I was talking about, yes, there's
so what are those functions?
Yes, what are their functions? Well, there's two things that you're going to need to explain here. One is when we talk about consciousness, when we talk about experiences, when we say that someone's having a conscious experience, what exactly is happening? What is the brain doing? What kinds of, I think it's too simplistic to talk about it in terms of information processing, but let's use that term as just as a sort of shorthand. It means it's a term for all the things that the brain is doing that can be analyzed that can be explained by cognitive science. It's not just a matter of information, but a lot more. But anyway, so we have to characterize the kind of information processing, if you like, that constitutes consciousness. Okay, so that's one thing. And then separately, a separate thing is to explain why we have the sense that there's more to consciousness than that. You have to explain both what consciousness really is and why we have the illusion that it's something else. Okay, so the two separate things, like maybe well be, and I think it is, the illusion is something that's a distinctively human product, that it's to do with our ability. Again, I might need to qualify that, but let's go with it for now. That it's to do with our ways that we have of self-monitoring and self-modeling, and it's probably connected to a large extent with language. That's what helps create this illusion. But consciousness itself isn't a distinctively human thing at all. Okay, the basic kinds of information processing that constitute consciousness. In fact, I think I don't think it's a single. It's not a well-defined thing, I don't think. Okay. Another temptation of the phenomenal realist view, the view that I'm rejecting, the intrinsic view, is that consciousness is like an inner light, metaphorically, that it's either there or it isn't. Now, once you drop that view and think of consciousness more like the performing of certain functions, then you get a much more graded picture. Maybe there can be very simple functions that are within this general area, but are much simpler, much less complex than the ones that we call consciousness in humans. And maybe there are different dimensions among which we can measure these functions. It's not just a matter of a single function being performed, but of many functions, and some can be performed more in more more complex ways than others. And so you're going to have something like a map with many different dimensions on it, and will map different forms of consciousness on this map. So it won't be a question of saying, are fish conscious? It will be, what is the consciousness of fish like? And now the way that let me say a little bit more about what I think this will be a map of. I just talked about information processing isn't very illuminating. I think it's to do with what I use the term reactivity. So the idea is that consciousness isn't just a matter of perception, of getting information about the world through your senses. What makes information conscious, what makes perceptual information conscious, is that it gets to have all sorts of effects on the rest of the brain, on other brain systems. Okay. So this is a view that has a lot in common with what's sometimes called global workspace theory, The idea that information is conscious when it is globally broadcast to the whole range of brain systems. The idea is that the brain has many different networks that perform many different functions, some for emotions, some for attention, some for cognition, that's some for language. That's simplistic. And the idea is that conscious information is information that's broadcast to all of them. I have a slightly different angle on this. Way I think of it is that it's more not so much a matter of it's being broadcast, but it's being used by these systems, having effects on them, producing changes in them, updating our emotional state, redirecting our attentional focus, priming us to respond in certain ways to the next round of stimulation. Every stimulus that comes in produces a huge wave of changes across multiple brain networks. It sort of resets the whole, retunes the brain for the next, to deal with the next round of stimulation. That's the point, to keep us alert and alive and anticipating what's going to happen next. And information is conscious in virtue of having a significant effect. Okay, how significant? How long's a piece of string? It isn't a matter of it crossing some threshold and the light suddenly bang there consciousness. It's a matter of it having increasingly more complex, more potent effects on us. So that's essentially what I think consciousness is, that it's stimulation having a substantial effect upon a wide range of neural systems, so that it becomes, as Dan Dennett said, famous in the brain. Okay, so consciousness is cerebral celebrity, neural celebrity. It's having, and this means, of course, that the information is in that sense present to you as the collection of all those systems. Okay, your attention is grabbed by it. You can talk about it. You're reacting to it. You're focused on it. That's something you're conscious of. It's taken hold of you, hold of all the systems that compose you. And that's what being conscious of something is. And that's going to come, depending on the kind of brain you have, the kind of system you have, it's going to come in different forms to different creatures. I want different, depending on the complexity of their different neural subsystems, neural networks. How do we get from that to the illusion of it being something else? I think that's to do with our monitoring our own patterns of reactivity and having a general sense that, oh, now I've been struck by stimulation in this way. The coffee taste, it had that pattern of effects, but I can't articulate it as a pattern of stimulation in this area and that area and these particular effects. I just have a general sense of it being that global effect again that I had when I tasted the coffee before, and that is a bit like the effect of, say, tasting tea, but not really, and so so I think it's reactivity is what consciousness is. Global reactivity and modeling of global reactivity is what creates the illusion.
That makes sense. When you said the example with the philosophical zombie, you said it's did you use the term depsychologized?
That's a term that I used. Yeah, it's the idea is that people who think zombies are conceivable, not necessarily possible, because they may think there are laws of nature in our world that say whenever you get this certain brain state, you get the conscious state too. But that's just a contingent law of nature in our world. It's conceivable you could have the brain states, the brain processes, without it, which you couldn't have if it is just reactivity, because you couldn't have reactivity without reactivity. Yes, so what I say is they have a depsychologized conception of consciousness, which means that they don't conceptualize consciousness in terms of functions, in terms of psychological functions. They conceptualize it as something distinct from them that happens to go along with them. So by depsychology, I mean, if you like, defunctionalized. It's a conception of consciousness not as something, the brain doing something, but the brain having some inner nature as it does things. And yes, so I think once you depsychologize consciousness in that way, and it's tempting to do so, it's tempting to think you can imagine the feel without any of the reactions. Once you do that, then you're in this realm of, well, it's got to be something additional that can't be explained simply by explaining the reactions.
So, okay, I'm struggling to understand when it comes to feelings.
Mm.
So w- so we can use cognitive science to explain um these functions, and these functions uh, are are things that we call consciousness, from what I understand. But th- th- I don't understand where feelings come to the equation, and how can we explain feelings through cognitive science? Is it through, let's say, you get a bunch of adrenaline rush, and then okay, now you're stressed? Is it like through understanding um, molecules and 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 stuff like that? How do we explain feelings through neuroscience and cognitive science?
Good question. Give me an example of a feeling, just to start us off with. Say
Let's
pain, maybe?
say I feel sad because it's raining and I wanted it to be sunny, and my housemates is feeling happy because it's raining, because he didn't want it to be sunny. He wanted his garden to grow with his apple trees or whatever. An example like of something like that.
That's a
Something
very
that
very specific feeling.
the reason I thought of something like that is, like, if let's say I gave the example of me breaking my hand, everyone's gonna feel pain. But what about those kind of a little bit more
More
nuanced
subtle
examples
ones.
when you don't really know how someone will react, kind of?
Very nice. Yes, I like that idea. So it's kind of subtle, more like a mood.
Mm.
Well, first of all, we need. There's a lot that can be done towards giving functional analyses of moods and emotions. Okay, so um, when you're in a certain mood, it's not just there are certain physiological aspects to this. Okay, which we can describe. I mean, if you're feeling elated and so on, there'll be certain hormonal or whatever differences. There's a physiological basis to these moods, and so you can track all of that. Okay, but there's also going to be a lot of psychological aspects to it too. You're going to have uh, you got to have certain beliefs, first of all. I mean, in the way you described that situation, you believed that you would a hope that you'd had been disappointed. Okay, so we need to sort of tease apart all the different components of the mood. Well, if it's an emotion itself, but emotions also can involve other emotions. It's going to involve a sense of various certain bodily changes, an awareness of a certain state of your body. Okay, and a response to those bodily changes. Okay, so you're going to be aware that maybe your heart is beating fast, or if you're excited or something, you're going to be aware of that, and you're going to be reacting to that, to the sense of these bodily changes. Okay, so you're detecting changes. And I think that's a big component of emotion, is a sense of how you're being affected bodily by the situation. And that's a huge component of emotion and mood. And so you're going to be monitoring, the brain is going to be monitoring these bodily changes and reacting to them. And that's going to be adjusting your overall attitude to the world, if you like, how you are disposed now to respond to future things happening to you. If you're depressed, you respond differently to stimuli than if you're elated. If you're feeling elated, you seize the opportunity to talk. Okay, you're anxious to talk and to share things and so on. If you're depressed, you're not. There's a change to your overall disposition to the world. Your overall orientation to the world has changed. Stimuli affect you differently. You're receptive in a different way to the world. Okay, you may feel strong inclination if you're feeling low to avoid other people, to avoid talking, to perhaps want to be on your own, maybe to try and escape by watching a movie or reading a book or something. All sorts of subtle changes to your dispositions have happened. And that is what the mood is. It is this subtle reorientation of your whole psychological state. And you can't describe it because you can't pull this apart and articulate it. It's very difficult. I've just been trying to, but it's not easy. Certainly not easy just just by sitting in an armchair. You're going to have, we need to do a lot of experiment to tease apart all these different dispositional changes. But it's quite feasible to do that. And your sense of the overall mood is arises, I think, from you or your brain tracking this global reorientation that's happened because of the piece of news you had or whatever. It's you're tracking that, and you have a sense of it. Well, I'm in that kind of state again with that sort of shape, but I can't pull it apart. That's a thing where scientists could help us. And that's what I call being sad, being disappointed, having this quite undescribable feeling of disappointment and envy all muddled up together. Okay, it's not that there really is some sort of strange amorphous property that is there, as well as all the dispositional changes and the reactive changes to your reactive dispositions. It's not that there really is this sort of cloudy amorphous thing hanging over you as well. That's just your way of describing the psychological reorientation that has happened. And I think the sense of bodily awareness is incredibly important in this. That's what really colors our sense of our moods and our emotions. And we may not be able to articulate it in detail. We may say, I just feel sad, but that feeling it may be possible to decompose that into all senses, into an awareness of all sorts of physiological alterations. And one way to make this, I think, more plausible is to try to imagine being in that mood, yet all of those psychological and physiological responses not being present. Okay, so you say, oh, I feel depressed, but I don't feel disinclined to talk to people. I don't feel inclined to want to stay in and be on my own. I feel quite willing to engage with things, to do things. So imagine having the feeling of depression, say, but without any of the psychological responses that are associated with depression, physiological responses associated with depression. Well, for the same reason that zombies are supposed to be conceivable, that should be conceivable. But I don't find it conceivable. If I'm reacting both internally and externally as if I'm happy and alert, then I am happy and alert. I'm not depressed. I mean, what more do I want? Does that begin to go some way to showing you how you could get a third-person scientific perspective on this, and one that might actually be more illuminating than the first-person perspective? Because you may go to the cognitive scientist, I mean, this is actually feasible, and say, oh, I'm in this kind of state, I don't really know how to describe it, I don't know what's going on, it's strange, it's puzzling me, it's sort of troubling me, and they may start, run all sorts of experiments on you. Say, well, it seems that this is what is happening. These are the kind of changes that have been happening and that you've been aware of. Does that now help you to conceptualize it better, to understand it better, and maybe to deal with it better? And it seems to be perfectly possible that the answer might be yes. Now I get a sense of what is really happening, why I'm feeling depressed like this, and what that depression actually involves. I feel more able to cope with it. Because it's not just some strange thing from another realm that has kind of imposed itself on me. It's something that I can get a handle on, that I can begin to understand. And this is the fundamental thing that drives my approach to consciousness, that I want to understand how this works, I want to understand how our minds work, how my mind works. And I'm not content with being told, well, that's just a sort of fundamental fact that it just happens when you're in this brain state. There's that feeling, and we can't explain it. It just happens. No, I don't want to be told that consciousness is fundamental in that way. I want to understand it. And even if I'm wrong, it certainly seems worth trying before we give up and say, no, we can't.
No, this makes a lot of sense. Before I ask you about your thoughts on artificial intelligence and machine consciousness, I just want to be stubborn just to understand in my head the different arguments around philosophical zombies, because it's still a bit disorganized in my head, and I just want to kind of ingrain it a little bit better. So some people say philosophical zombies are not possible because of nature's limitations. So that's, some people would say that. Others would say, no, we can't create these philosophical zombies and they wouldn't differ to us. And then other people say they would differ to us. Can you explain to me the different, almost like
Right.
points of seeing it?
Well, look, let's take three. Let's take one. Let's first of all start with the position that I've been advocating, which is that consciousness is nothing more than the brain doing certain things. Okay. Now, the brain of a zombie is supposed to be an exact physical duplicate of a human being, say of me. Okay. Now, the brain of my living in a world with the same physical laws. So, the brain of my zombie twin is doing exactly what my brain is doing. Now, if my consciousness is simply a matter of my brain doing certain things, then my zombie twin is going to be conscious too, because this brain is doing the same things. Okay, so it's not conceivable that there should be a philosophical zombie that isn't just that is any different from me. Okay, that there is a physical. So in that sense, philosophical zombies aren't conceivable. Any exact physical duplicate would be a complete duplicate and would have consciousness. Now, that depends on the way that I conceptualize consciousness, okay, as a function, okay, that's being performed by my brain. Now, suppose I conceive consciousness in the other way, in the depsychologized way, in the intrinsic way, as something extra, over and above, or perhaps sort of deeply intrinsic to the functioning of my brain. Okay, but I don't conceptualize consciousness in functional terms, in terms of my brain doing something. It's something distinct from that. Now, then there's the question. Okay, so I can at least imagine a philosophical zombie whose brain does all these things but doesn't have consciousness. I can imagine that because I conceptualize the two things as distinct. And if I can conceptualize them as distinct, then I could, at least in imagination, I can pull them apart, imagine one without the other. Similarly, I could imagine a ghost, which is just the consciousness without the physical thing. The two things are not. Now, does that mean that these things actually occur in our world, that you could make a duplicate of me and it not be conscious? Well, a lot of people think, no, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that they actually could be zombies, that that person over there might just be a zombie. So what they say is, well, there are extra laws of nature in our world, in addition to the physical laws of nature, that link physical states with phenomenal states, with consciousness states. And they say there are these basic laws of nature in our world that are additional to the laws that govern how physical stuff behaves. And that they state things like when the brain is in a certain sort of, when the brain is doing certain things, let's say, processing information in a certain way or performing certain functions or whatever, the organism, the subject, has this feeling, experiences this intrinsic feeling. So there are these extra laws bridging the two realms, but they are just features of our world, of our universe, that is. We could imagine a universe where those laws don't hold, and there they would be zombies. Or we could imagine a world where the laws are all mixed up, and you have the phenomenal zombies the philosophical zombies, the zombies, the physical duplicates of us, have different consciousness states from the ones that we have. So maybe when their brains are doing all the things that ours do when we're in pleasure, these are in pain, but they're still behaving as if they were experiencing pleasure, because there's this disconnect between the two things, okay? And it just happens that in our world, the laws are nicely arranged so that when your brain is producing all the reactions associated with pain, you feel pain as well, which is, very nice, but kind of, how did our universe get set up so nicely that the two things always go in harmony? You have a problem of psychophysical harmony. And indeed, recently, I apologize, I forgot the name of the author. The paper suggests that this is actually an argument for the existence of God, for setting these laws up so nicely that the two things mapped together, so that we didn't feel pain when we were actually reacting as if we were in pleasure, and vice versa. So that's the whole question of philosophical zombies or phenomenal zombies. I don't know. The P is the P for phenomenal or for philosophical. I'm not sure. Never mind. the whole question turns on how you conceptualize consciousness in the first place. If you conceptualize it as something that is not entailed by the physical processes in themselves, that is not, it's not, you can't analyze consciousness in functional terms, then that opens the conceptual possibility. And if there's a conceptual possibility, then there's a possible world where the two things actually do come apart. The actual world is not that world, because there are natural laws in this world that link the two together nicely, that make them harmonize. Does that help? I rambled a bit there.
No, that makes no. I understand now.
But the very fact that there's this puzzle of how the things get correlated so beautifully, that seems to me another argument for thinking, well, you shouldn't have depsychologized it in the first place. If you've got now a puzzle, well, if you conceptualize consciousness as something that can come apart from the psychological functions being performed, and now you have this problem, well, how did these laws of nature get set up so neatly that there's always this wonderful correspondence between the two, and you maybe have to bring in God to try and explain that? Well, maybe that's a reason for saying maybe we shouldn't have pulled the two things apart in the first place.
Don't duplicate. Yeah. Yes. Sorry to interrupt.
Whenever you have a dualism, you have to sort of integrate the two parts of the duality, and maybe that's one of the models. If you're struggling with that, don't maybe pull them apart in the first place.
Yes. No, that makes a lot of. You are making a very good case for illusionism.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, so I completely get it, and I agree with. Let's say we created a duplicate of Kyriakos or a duplicate of Professor Keith that's made by exactly the same stuff and it's doing exactly the same function. It'd be the same thing for sure. The thing that it would be conscious. The thing that I'm curious now is when it comes to what the organism is made of. Does it need to be biological cells like ours? Can it be inorganic, like a machine, and then can we produce consciousness from that? So how does it, in other words, does it need to be the same substrate, or can we create consciousness from a different substrate? And again, you're not going to give me an exact answer. It's like, this is exactly how it is, but because but we have to see how things develop too in artificial intelligence, etc. But what's your thoughts on it?
First of all, let me say this to try and frame it. If you conceptualize consciousness in this way as an extra realm that is subjective, that is only the only person who could really know what your consciousness is like is you. Okay. It's not part of the objective world that can be studied by science. Okay, we trust that it's there in other people, but we can't actually detect it. All we can detect are the neural correlates. Then, kind of consciousness is hidden from us, but from everyone except the subject. Now, none of us are artificial. None of us are artificial intelligences. So none of us has any experience of what it's like to be an AI, and it's hidden from public investigation. So it seems like there's this deep mystery. Maybe it's already there, maybe it isn't there. How would we ever know if it were there? Because all we can ever detect are reactions, both external and internal, both behavioral and internal responses. Okay, that's all we can ever detect. We can go to the philosophers and say, oh, which kind of physical states are the ones that make the inner light come on, that bring the subjective world into existence, because we know that it's in these physical states, but we don't know whether they are the right kind to bring the light on. And if philosophers all said, yeah, it's very straightforward, it's these particular physical states, those are the ones that bring the lights on, see if you've got those, and if you have, it's conscious. But there's no agreement like that at all. As I said, some people think that electrons are conscious. Okay, so some people think the whole universe is. Some people think that only biological things can be conscious, but they're thinking about the relation between a physical system and this hidden thing. Okay, and there's no agreement. So really, it's just have the inner lights come on. No one really knows. All we can do is speculate, and that will be so forever. Okay. Now, because I don't see any prospect of the philosophers getting agreement on this. Now, suppose you take the sort of perspective I do, where no, consciousness is part of this public world. It's a matter of the brain performing certain functions, producing a cluster of reactions. Okay, now the question is, well, pin that down a bit more. Tell me what sort of, give me a more detailed account of these functions, of these reactions you're talking about. And then, if that's what consciousness is, and we reproduce those things in artificially, then it will be conscious, because that's it. Now, here's where it becomes a bit more difficult from my side, because there isn't a straightforward answer. Well, it's this particular set of reactions that constitute consciousness or reactive dispositions. As I said earlier, it's going to be completely graded on multiple dimensions. Okay, so there isn't a bright line where you say, oh, if it's performing these functions, it's conscious, and if it's not, it's not. That's actually a picture that's influenced by the old inner light view. Has the inner light come on? There isn't an inner light. There's just functions being performed. Are those functions rich enough, complex enough, similar enough to human ones for us to call it conscious? Okay, that's a kind of pragmatic question. It's how far we're prepared to extend the term consciousness and all the implications that go along with it for our treatment of them, of the other creatures. We haven't even settled it with other animals yet. I think we're getting a bit better, doing a bit better, but still, it's we haven't extended the circle widely enough within the biological realm yet. Now, would the substrate matter? Well, again, it would depend on whether the substrate was capable of supporting the sort of functions we're talking about. Now, maybe the functions are very fine-grained, and certainly, in the case of human consciousness, they're deeply bound up with our being embodied beings. Okay, because a huge part of what of the reactions I'm talking about are reactions to physiological changes. Okay, so anxiety is bound up with a sense of certain bodily changes. Okay, now if you've got some AI that doesn't have a body and doesn't have any sort of interoceptive feedback like an LLM, then it can't have anxiety in that sense, because it simply doesn't have those kind of states to monitor. Okay, and simply doesn't have bodily reactions. Okay, so something like an LLM is going to be very, at the best, its reactivity is going to be very impoverished. It's just basically linguistic reactivity. The only thing that prompt into an LLM does is it produces some disposition to produce a linguistic output. That's it. There's no emotional processing. There's no I was going to say there's no cognitive processing, but that's arguable. But certainly I don't think there's any emotional thing. There's certainly nothing that's rooted in interoceptive awareness of bodily changes. So the question of so let's get a sort of richer picture of what our brains are actually doing when we say I'm having a conscious experience. Okay, let's flesh that out, and that's a big task. That's what cognitive science is engaged on. Let's flesh out this picture of what human reactivity is like. Let's flesh out a picture of what reactivity in other animals is like, going right down to perhaps to very simple life forms. Maybe there's analogs of this right at the even with the simple, very, very primitive animals, primitive multicellular animals. This is something that Walter White has argued in a recent book. And let's get a picture. There's a sort of map of consciousness territory. Okay, well, it's human consciousness here. There's other mammals sort of around here, maybe reptiles, some else, and so on. It's not going to be one-dimensional, many dimensions. And then we can ask where an AI sits in that territory. And there won't be an answer for AI and AIs in general. Maybe LLMs are going to be right down in a very small corner. Other embodied AIs, robotic systems that have bodies and wide range of sensors, they have another location. The question of whether you can create AI consciousness, it's not it's not a binary thing. It's either conscious or not. It's what kind of consciousness might you create? How similar is the sort of pattern of internal reactivity that you've created to human consciousness, or to dog consciousness, or to fish consciousness, or whatever? That's the question you should be asking. The idea that we need to ask this binary question, is it conscious or not, that's a hangover of the old inner light view. Okay? Has the light come on yet? That's the wrong way of thinking about it. It's the wrong question. So, in fact, asking how we tell whether AI is conscious is just a bad question. We ask, how similar is it, consciousness-wise, in all these aspects that are covered by this nebulous talk of consciousness? How similar is it in those respects to us or to other creatures? Much more productive framework, because that question can be answered, but much more, in a way, it's no longer a metaphysical puzzle, but it's a complex task of mapping all these different kinds of systems and trying to provide some kind of metric where you can compare them. And that's going to be a big task, but people are starting on it. We're starting to get these maps of consciousness space with other animals, and we'll extend those to AIs. There's nothing hidden. The crucial point is there's nothing hidden. There's nothing deeply hidden. We just have to do the work.
No, this makes a lot of sense, and I like that you reject. Well, you think it's not a productive way to frame it, to think, okay, will this be conscious or not? Because I think it also creates a lot of unnecessary public, what's the right words? Almost public. It stresses the public out for the wrong reasons, I feel. But the question, how similar is it, makes more sense. So it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that an essential thing that we need for consciousness is this internal monitoring of our own brain, this kind of internal model almost.
No, I don't think that's necessary for consciousness. I think consciousness is the kind of is a complex, is substantial neural reactivity. Okay, things are conscious when they seize our attention. A stimulus is conscious when it seizes our attention, and we start reacting to it in all sorts of ways. We don't have to also model that reactivity for us to have a conscious experience of the stimulus. Okay, so I'm quite happy that wide range of creatures that don't do self-modeling are conscious. Okay, in a perfectly sound sense of the word. What you get with the internal modeling, I think, is the illusion of consciousness being something more than just that. Okay, so I think other animals are, non-human animals are conscious, but I don't think they have the illusion of consciousness in this magical sense. Okay, and I think that's probably only something that you get really when you become social creatures, when you start talking about your experience, trying to articulate your experience to other people. You see, I mean, let me actually backtrack on that a little bit. I think, I want to backtrack. I think there are purposes for self-monitoring and self-modeling in even very simple creatures. Okay, because by monitoring your own reactivity, you learn something interesting about the stimulus. You learn how the stimulus is affecting you, and that's a useful thing to know about in your decision making. So I think there will be, if you like, subpersonal monitoring will be widely present in the animal kingdom. But the more complex kind of monitoring that I'm talking about, that leads us to have this sense that we are something more than our brains. That I think is a product of our nature as social beings and language using ones. Because if you're a social creature and you're cooperative, as we are, as we ideally are, being able to share information about how stimuli affect you is very, very useful. If you're observing me, you could probably tell that I didn't like the taste of something because I spat it out and so on. But you wouldn't be able to get a really good sense of what it was that I'd not liked. about it, what it was that had affected me. But if I have some self-monitoring, I'll be able to say, oh, well, it had a really bitter taste, or it tasted as if it had gone off, or something like this. I can try and fill in the details of how it affected me in a way that you couldn't infer just from looking at my my overt behavior. So I can give you details of, no, don't try that. It's too, it's too salty, say. You could see I didn't like it, but I can tell you it was too salty. And then you can avoid drinking it, or indeed know what to expect if you do. So this ability to self-model and self-report seems to me to have, its value seems to be ramped up considerably once you get language-using social creatures. And I think this would select for cultural practices of self-reflection and self-reporting that eventually culminated in our having this sense of being something, having an inner life that is completely detached from the physical world. I should say there's also a very interesting story about this that's developed by my friend Nicholas Humphrey, the I was going to say evolutionary biologist and psychologist. He argues that this sense of having a magical inner life was not merely the byproduct of self-monitoring processes that were adaptive in them, but was adaptive in itself, because it enriched our sense of ourselves, of the importance and the value of our lives, and it gives us an enhanced appetite for life. So that he suggests there's actually an evolutionary and adaptive story to be told about that illusion itself, that the illusion isn't just a byproduct of other things that were adaptive, but was itself adaptive. Although he's not too keen on talk of illusion, but I think I did.
Yeah.
What question was there?
No. This makes sense. So, okay, let me just try to say out loud what I'm understanding, and I want you to correct me in case I'm completely. So, from what I understand, we have these models, these internal models that monitor what's going on, what our behavior, and then is I don't know if behavior is a good word.
More like our internal behavior, more like our complex internal reactions, like our neural behavior, if you like.
Okay, so our neural behavior, and that monitoring creates this illusion that suddenly the fact that we can do this means that things cannot be explained, the consciousness cannot be explained purely by studying the neuroscience and the cognitive science of the brain.
Yeah, that's roughly it. I mean, let me mention an analogous theory that I've actually borrowed from. This is Michael Gazzaniga's work on the attention schema.
I sorry to interrupt you, but I did a podcast on attention schema theory with Michael Graziano last week, which I found very
did I say?
interesting.
Did I say Gazzaniga there or Graziano? I sometimes get the words. It is Graziano, of course.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, great. Well, maybe your
it's very interesting.
Viewers can just watch that instead of me trying to.
No, please do, because
I won't give you the sort of accurate summary that you'll get in that interview. But the idea is that in order for you to control something, you need to model it. In order to control the body, the brain needs a model of the body schema that's constructed by the brain. In order to control attention, which is a very important thing to control, attentional resources are very precious. You can't be just attending to everything. The brain needs a model of attention. And so it models our attentional processes, but it models them. It doesn't need to model them in, completely faithful physical detail. It just needs a general sort of framework for thinking about attention. So it models attention as something like a Now, again, I want to be careful that I don't misrepresent my conservative models as something like almost like a beam that goes out from the eyes and latches onto things, or from the other sense, and that grabs information about these things and presents it directly to you. Okay, it's a non-physical model. A model of it is a non-physical process, a sort of spiritual or almost paranormal thing that just grabs information in a way that, of course, the brain couldn't possibly do. But that's useful for modeling attention, for deciding where attention is to go. Okay, and for example, and the brain constructs that model simply for its own internal control purposes. But then, when when humans develop the ability to sort of reflect on themselves and think about their own attention and think about what they're attending to and so on, the only resource they had was the information in this model. So when they asked, what are you attending to, or what's it like to attend to something, or whatever, how does attention work? All it had was this model the brain had constructed. We're not neuroscientists. Our knowledge of our own brains is limited to the models that the brain itself has created of them, unless you do neuroscience. Okay, so we have this simplified caricature model of attention. That's all we have natively, without doing science, and that seems to. So when we asked to try and describe how attention works, we describe it in these seemingly non-physical terms. We have this idea that that our minds are not just limited to these physical things in here, but they can do quite magical things. And hence, when we tell the story about our own attention, when we try to articulate this in words, we get a sort of dualism. And I'm taking a very similar framework, but applying it more broadly, not just to attention, but to the whole pattern of reactive changes to our reactive dispositions that occur as that are produced by stimuli. So we're kind of modeling our own, not just our own attentional orientation to the world, but our entire psychological orientation to the world, if you like. How this stimulus has calibrated me to the world. And the idea is, again, that the brain, it's useful to have a model of this, partly so that we can tell other people about how this stimulus affected me. Don't eat that. It's very bitter or something. Because we recognize the brain recognizes the bitter pattern of reactions occurring. But again, like the attention scheme, it's highly simplified, highly caricatured. It doesn't present it as a pattern of changes in brain systems. It's that kind of shape of effect that the stimulus has had on me. I can't describe it, but it's sort of a bit like that other one, and a bit different from this one. And it's very distinctive, and I can recognize when it happens. But it doesn't seem like a brain state. It's just this thing that is immediately present to me, as so it seems. And that's how I describe it. Okay, so the idea is that our self-awareness is mediated by whatever self-models the brain has created. Because how else would it be? How else would we get knowledge of what's happening within us without some sort of self-modeling? We would just say, I have no idea. I don't know what's happening to me. I'd be reacting, but I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about how I react, except by the same way that you can, by observing my behavior. If I want to tell you what's happening inside, as it were, physically inside me, then I need self-modeling mechanisms, self-monitoring, self-modeling mechanisms. And the idea is that's what distorts our self-conception when we try to articulate it.
This makes sense. And there's one thing that I don't know how I feel about. I want to ask you, which is, I wonder if it's Daniel Dennett that chose the word illusionism. Initially.
He often talked about illusion in this context. That I think the term illusionism, I introduced, but certainly it was a nod to his use of the word illusion. But that doesn't matter.
So why did you choose the word illusionism specifically? The reason I'm asking you is because everything you said to me makes so much sense to me, and I subscribe to it. But I feel like, let's say I live with 4 guys. We train jiu-jitsu together, which is like a martial art, and I sometimes try to talk to them about things I'm interested in, and I feel like if I tell them everything that you said, which I can't, but I'll tell them to watch the episode, because you explain it much better, obviously, and I will make a bunch of mistakes explaining it. But
I make mistakes explaining it too.
No,
I
10
often
times
think,
less
damn,
as
I
well.
didn't explain that very well. I should have. But anyway,
but I think if I don't use the word illusionism to begin with, and I try to explain it, they'll be very susceptible to listening. But if I put the word illusionism, when I begin, maybe if I give, what I'm trying to say in other words is, do you think the word creates misconceptions and people get confused when you use that word? I wonder why you chose it. And do you think it's the best word, or is there other words that might make it more justice? I don't know what, maybe deception, because from what I understand, consciousness exists, but it's just not what we think it is. What we think it is an illusion, if
Well,
I'm understanding correctly.
the thing that's an illusion is this extra realm, this
Yes.
magical extra realm. That's an illusion, I say. So consciousness, if that's how you're thinking about consciousness, then that's an illusion. But I think there's a perfectly good use for the word consciousness, which is perfectly consonant with everyday usage, which is not illusory. It's like saying, is free will an illusion? Okay, well, if you think of free will as something that isn't bound by the laws of physics, that you can actually move stuff around in your brain in ways, by virtue of an act of will that, that changes how particles, that makes particles behave in ways that the laws of physics wouldn't predict. Right, well, that doesn't exist. Right, you can't actually intervene in the causal order of nature simply by an act of will. I don't think, but it's perfectly reasonable to talk about it as having free will in the sense of being autonomous, in having all sorts of rich capacities for self-control, evolved capacities for self-control. Okay, so it's not like we're being forced to do anything. So free will, again, in one sense it's an illusion, in another sense it isn't. Take life. People used to think that life requires something more than just chemical processes, that it required a vital spark of some kind that was infused into the living thing. Or maybe it required a soul on some views. Okay, maybe it's maybe people thought that life required a soul. Is that illusionism? Is denying that illusionism about life? Denying the existence of a vital spirit, is that illusionism about life? No, it's not. That would suggest that we're all dead. It's saying that life isn't what you thought it was, and the thing that you thought it was is an illusion. Okay, and I think I've said, I think in what we've been talking about in the analogies with magic, with distortion, with the way that processes in our brains create a false impression. I mean, that's what an illusion is. An illusion isn't something that, it's not a hallucination. It's not something that's just completely invented. It's a misrepresentation of something that's real. When you see the magician apparently levitate, David Copperfield levitating, you're seeing something real. Definitely. It's just not what you think it is. Okay. It's not actually going up without any support. Okay. So it's an illusion in virtue of being a misrepresentation of something real. And that's exactly what I think the philosophical conception of consciousness is. It's a misrepresentation. And the everyday, I think our everyday conception, when we reflect on consciousness, we very easily get into this sense that it can't be physical. And that's an illusion. But consciousness itself is real, and what's happening on stage is real. The spectacle is real. Now, so that's. I think it's a. I think it's a
good word.
Descriptive word.
Yeah.
It also does have. I admit that it also does raise some people's hackles, and some people think, "What do you say?" And obviously, I prefer that everybody just didn't misunderstand it. But at the same time, I do like the fact that it shakes people up a little bit, because this does require some rethinking of our conception of ourselves. Okay, a lot of people are just convinced that they, without doing any science or anything like this, that they can just think about their own consciousness and a priori work out that it can't be physical. Okay, they think they can just sit in their armchair and just, well, it can't be. And I'm saying, no, you're in the grip of an illusion, and you need to do some serious reorientation. You're in the grip of a certain picture, and you need to break out of it. And that is quite shocking, if you like. It's not shocking, I think, in terms of its consequences. I don't think it means we give up anything that matters. It certainly doesn't have any ethical consequences, I think, any consequences for how we, in fact, quite the opposite. It, in fact, makes it easier to extend our ethical concern to other creatures because there's no longer a question of whether there's something secret and hidden inside them that we can never know. We can know everything if we try hard enough. So the shock value is kind of useful too, because we do need to do something. Just if I'd had a view, I mean, it's hard to think of, if I just, well, it's a sort of functionalism about consciousness. People would have said, oh, but you can't explain consciousness in functional terms. That's been established because consciousness is something, because they have this conception. And so they would just dismiss it. And I say, well, no, you can, because you're under an illusion about what consciousness is. And once you say that, then you can say, we can explain it in functional terms. So, I mean, any single word is going to have a positives and negatives.
Illusion is good, because I stand corrected, because I think when I was framing that question to you initially, I didn't know what illusion meant. I had a different idea of what illusion means. But when you said it's a misrepresentation of something real, then yes, I think illusion is a great term, because there's something that it is to be conscious, but it's not what you think it is. So illusion is a great word. In my head, and also, I thought illusion meant something different. Sorry, please.
Well, maybe some people do use it that way, but the way I'm thinking of it, the analogy that I have in mind is the stage illusion. The illusionist, like David Copperfield or whatever. And I've explained why I like that analogy. But also, I also love illusions of that. I really think these are wonderful things. So it's not meant to be a disparaging term for consciousness, to diminish it. But I think these are wonderful. But what's wonderful about them is the effect that's created on us. Okay, the actual mechanisms and so on, they're clever. The brain's clever. What's wonderful is the effect that it creates. What's wonderful, I mean, the illusion that is created on the stage is a product of intense work by many people over many weeks and months. These things are really hard to craft. Often, those the very spectacular ones are. And it's the simplicity of the effect that is so wonderful. They work hard to make this very simple but profound impression on the audience. And I kind of like, that's my comparison with consciousness. The brain has created these incredibly complex systems, all sorts of good evolutionary reasons, and they produce this simple effect on us of having a magical inner life. And that's a wonderful effect. It's great to have that. I'm not complaining about having it or diminishing it, but that doesn't mean we have to take it quite at face value. Indeed, it would be remarkable if evolution had given us a complete insight into our own nature. Why would evolution need to do that? It doesn't. It just equips us with what we need to survive. It doesn't need to give us a deep insight into our own intrinsic nature. That's asking too much.
Yes. No, this makes sense. I understand why you chose the word illusion now, and it makes sense. There's a few questions I want to ask you. You mentioned maps of consciousness. So when you say that, do you mean NCCs, neural correlates of consciousness, or do you mean something different?
Well, I don't want to talk about the neural correlates of consciousness, because that implies that these things are distinct from consciousness. They are things that are correlated with it. Okay. Now, I don't say they're correlated with it. They are it. These patterns of reaction that I'm talking about are conscious and not correlated with it. We don't talk about the gastric correlates of digestion. What's happening there? That is the digestive process. It's not correlated with it. It is it. Same for the brain. So I wouldn't now as to these maps. Maybe not. It depends how finely we want to map the territory. Do we want to? What sort of level of description we think is significant for mapping this territory for the concerns that we have, which are often ethical concerns, about how we treat other creatures. Do we need to map these? I'm talking about patterns of reactive reactivity changes, changes to our reactive dispositions. How finely do we need to map those? Do we need to map them right down to the micro level, at the level at which we're talking about, small populations of neurons, or is it enough to do at a coarser grained level, more a level of at which psychological vocabulary it becomes relevant, talking about forming memories, beliefs and so on? We need to decide at what level of description is going to be most useful. It's a pragmatic question, and then and how many different dimensions we want to map. So we want to map things like evaluative, affective, emotional, cognitive. Again, this is very simplistic, attentional. We may need to find a whole new vocabulary for mapping this. It's pragmatic. It's going to be driven by theory, driven by a combination of working cognitive science and social concerns, I think, about how questions about consciousness feed into the way we treat each other and other creatures, and potentially artificial creatures, because consciousness talk is doing two things. It has I'm going to say it has a use in science. That's actually an open question. Maybe cognitive science will say, well, we need to distinguish different forms of consciousness, different types of consciousness, whatever. I don't know. The term might not even be terribly useful. It's an everyday term. But it's also doing social work in, I'm a conscious being, I matter, So we need to find frameworks. We may need different frameworks for different purposes. We'll probably need theoretical frameworks for cognitive science that are different from the frameworks we need for thinking about our relations to other creatures. The point is this: I'm not claiming to have the answers to this, or even have outlines of the answers, but I can point you in the direction where I think the answers lie. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people to work on this project and stop speculating about this non-physical realm that can only be accessed. Yes, exactly. Yes. So I'm trying to start people on these questions, just like the one you asked, which are in the end the only questions we can actually really make progress on, and which it's enough. It's enough to make progress on those. So let's focus our efforts on that, especially at this time when we're getting pressing questions about artificial consciousness. I think claims of artificial consciousness are massively hyped at the moment, but it might not be too long before these questions start to press.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Has there been any attempts? I don't know if global workspace theories count as attempts towards that direction. Is there any attempts that you think, oh, we should work more on what you guys are doing?
Well, that's an interesting question. It depends how you think of global workspace theory. Is it a theory of the correlates of consciousness, the functional correlates of consciousness, the idea that if information gets globally broadcast, then the inner light comes on? Or is it that that global broadcast constitutes consciousness? That's all there is to consciousness. Very different approaches. If it's the second, then it's certainly in line with the approach that I have, and it's not very different from the sort of reactivity picture that I have, though this global broadcast suggests more of a clean boundary between information that isn't broadcast and information that is broadcast. I think I want to have it a bit more keep it more fuzzy. But anyway, if you conceptualize those processes as consciousness, the broadcast is consciousness, then that's in line with this. There are other projects in consciousness science like IIT, which explicitly start from the first person perspective, which treat the first person data, treat the first person intuitions about consciousness as data, and try to build an objective picture on the back of those intuitions. Now that's very much in a different, that belongs in a different approach. And one thing I'd like, and I think consciousness scientists aren't always, many aren't clear enough about which, I think we can talk about a shift of paradigms here between the old phenomenal realist paradigm and this illusionist paradigm, if you like. Or I'm using the terms Cartesian and post-Cartesian for this. I don't think I don't think consciousness scientists are explicit enough about this, or perhaps even with themselves. If you have in the older paradigm, then there is this hard problem of explaining how the brain relates, how the brain creates or produces or whatever is associated with this other realm. There's a hard problem. If you take my approach, there isn't. There are just lots and lots of what David Chalmers would have called easy problems, though they're hard scientific problems. Now, you'll find a lot of consciousness scientists kind of saying, well, yeah, the hard problem, yeah, I acknowledge it, but I'm kind of going to do this. And then they do something that's much more tractable scientifically. But they still acknowledge it as if somehow it's got to be dealt with in some way. It's got to be acknowledged and incorporated somehow into the account. I think they should just have the confidence to say, no, it's an illusion. There isn't a hard problem. That's an illusion. That's product illusion. So I'd like consciousness scientists to be much more aware of this issue, and aware that there are really two fundamentally different ways you can approach this, which correspond to different ways of conceptualizing consciousness. And I'd like them to, I think they'd be better for them and for the progress in consciousness science to adopt the post-Cartesian one that I favor.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you about God. So I know it's a little bit, but you mentioned already God in the conversation. I also asked Michael Graziano about it, and he had some really interesting thoughts about God and how he wrote a little bit about God.
Oh, I didn't know that.
How it relates to his idea and attention schema theory. So
I must read that.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I wonder what your views are, and how if it relates in any way with what we've been talking about consciousness.
Yeah, well, okay. Let's sort of go off the record a bit, although we're being recorded, but let me speculate a bit here. I suppose I would, if you asked me, I would say I was an atheist. I don't have any commitment to any religious faith. I don't have any beliefs in any supernatural beings or forces or whatever. I think science tells us about the world, the natural world. So the question is there some? But I can see how there might be an analogy. It might be that God's an illusion in the way that consciousness is an illusion. That it's that God's talk is a way of articulating a certain attitude to the world that is perfectly real, that we have to the world, a certain way of responding to the world. Maybe or even of picking out a pattern in the world. This is a thing, a notion that Dan Dennett like to stress, the idea that a lot of our talk is doing, psychological talk, is picking out patterns in people's behavior. And so maybe there's a pattern in the world. There's certainly a wondrous impressiveness to the world, to the universe. You only have to go outside at night and have a look upwards on a clear night to see that the world is wonderfully impressive, and to also see that certain moral, or if you like, using the word spiritual in a very broad sense, attitudes are important to us. There's a certain way we respond to this wonder of the world, and we respond to each other, that doesn't seem to be captured by scientific talk, and that is often captured quite well by religious talk. And maybe we could take an illusionist perspective on that and say what we're doing here is taking real patterns and real patterns in the world and real genuine responses to them in us, and conceptualizing them in very human terms, in terms of relations to another human being, a father figure or a mother figure or whatever it might be, or to some savior figure. And So that you could develop, I think, an illusionist perspective on religion, which it doesn't simply say, "Oh, religion's it's just a lot of nonsense. It's got no role at all to play in our understanding of the world." We could say, no, it's a way of articulating very important things that, which I think about, which is the same about consciousness talk, but which shouldn't be taken, too literally, shouldn't be built up into some metaphysical framework or supernatural framework. It should be more rooted in the reality that science does describe and in our reactions to that reality. But it's a way of capturing aspects of that is not easily captured in other language. So is that what you were getting at with the idea of illusionism as a perspective on the divine as well as on consciousness? I am very tempted by that, I must say, because I'm not by nature I think people sometimes think that because of the views that I have, that I'm some pig-headed materialist who is not interested in spirit, in anything spiritual, or anything, or indeed, I think some people think I'm not interested in the humanities and in the inner life and in artistic attempts to articulate that. I'm completely the opposite. I'm very sympathetic to all those things. I just don't want to engage in wishful thinking. I mean, I would dearly like
contradict
to believe with science, and I mean, I would dearly love to believe that I will be reunited with loved ones. I would dearly love to believe that, but I don't want to live in false hope. I don't want to deceive myself. I care too much about understanding things and trying to, and I think that the world. The world deserves our attention and I think it's a matter of respecting reality in the world, that we try to understand it and explain it, rather than simply reducing it to our own the frameworks that we find comfortable. The universe is much it's much bigger than us, and we can't comprehend it on its own scale, but we can try. We can try at least not to reduce it. And I think the same about the human mind. It's wonderful. It's more wonderful than the people who think, "Oh, consciousness is fundamental. That's it." No, it's more wonderful than that. It's explicable and understandable, and its complexity is amazing. And we shouldn't. It's disrespectful, I think, to the mind and to the universe to impose our narrow human-centered conceptions on it. Okay, so I went off a bit there, but
no, this is really good, and it shows that, like you said, it's. I think I talk to, I have some friends that like philosophy. I just like learning about everything, but when we talk about different books we've read and stuff like that, when the conversation comes to illusionism, I feel sometimes they're quite quick to disregard it, and I'm like, and I was always curious, but when you sit down, when I sit down now and talk to you, and I'm trying to understand, all these things make a lot of sense, and it's clear to me that you're not some like you've said, I think pig-headed. You use that word, materialist in that radical sense of rejecting. But no, that makes a lot of sense. There's something I've noticed, which is you do a really good job working, kind of almost combining philosophy and science and trying to have the best of both worlds. To the point where I'm not sure where one begins and one ends. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you, how you view these things? What's the differences of philosophy and science, and how to effectively use these two things together to produce something productive for society?
I guess it depends on what you're working on. If you're doing, say, something like, if you're doing, say, philosophical logic, then that's pretty clearly there's a formal discipline. it doesn't involve experimental work of any kind, I guess. If you're doing ethics or meta-ethics, again, this isn't something that really you can do experimental work. I suppose you can get experimental work on people's intuitions, but really you're trying to formalize intuitions and provide some framework for thinking about ethical matters. So it's not really an empirical subject as such, though, as I say, just draw on intuitions. If you're doing metaphysics, or by definition, really, I guess you're not doing science, because you're thinking about foundational issues that underlie science, the nature of causation, say, which is, and indeed a lot of philosophical work is about the foundations of different disciplines. It's about scrutinizing the concepts that particular disciplines take. Not just sciences, but humanities take for granted that, and so that's a really useful. It's a meta level process, and that's a really useful thing that philosophers do. Philosophers do lots of different things now, but when it comes to thinking about the mind, which has been a central part of philosophy, I guess, for a long time, I don't think you can do it without engagement with the science, because I think the mind is a natural phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that has to be investigated experimentally, and theorizing has to draw on experimental results. The reason it's still very much the province of aspects of it are still very much in the province of philosophy. The reason philosophers are still involved is because we haven't got theoretical, particularly with consciousness, we haven't got a good theoretical framework set up, and so philosophers are being called upon to help scientists conceptualize what they're doing. At the moment, AI researchers are calling upon philosophers to help them think about consciousness. Are we making conscious things or not? But what we're doing there, I think, in this case, is simply doing science at a more general level. We're thinking about the general theoretical frameworks that scientists need, not about fundamental concept. Well, yes, about fundamental conceptual issues and about theoretical frameworks for empirical work. It's much more directly engaged with the science, precisely because we're dealing with questions that are ultimately empirical. And I hope philosophers are helping with this a bit. I think in consciousness science, I think they've actually hindered it quite a lot, I would say. But the ideal, I suppose, would be that philosophers can hand it over completely to the scientists and say, now we've got all the conceptual models sorted out. We've got a theoretical framework that works. Well, there'll always be a need for reflection, for broader brush theorizing, something that experimentalists are often discouraged from doing. They sort of shut up and do the experiments and process the data. Don't start speculating. Philosophers are licensed to speculate, and I think that can be helpful to philosophers. So I think there probably always will be some role for them, but just as there's still a role for philosophers of biology in biology. But it's a back and forth. It's a fully integrated thing. It's not like metaphysics or ethics, where it's really a separate discipline, or philosophical logic. So you could equally well think of what we're doing as what I'm doing. I would think of it as highly theoretical cognitive science. I'm quite happy to think of it that way. In fact, I prefer to think of it that way. But philosophy isn't a single thing. It's a cluster of things. Some of them, I'm not sure there is a common thread to it all, except an historical one. And after all, natural philosophy used to include all branches of science, and so a lot of all the special sciences have cut away from natural philosophy. I don't think it really matters very much how we try to define these things. I think philosophy embraces lots of different things, and that's one of its one of the great things about it. And I think we should, trying to pin it down too much, we might end up excluding people. I mean, I don't want to do that. I'm not in favor of that. I'm more for including as much as possible and valuing it as much as possible. So that wasn't a very clear-cut answer, but it was. That makes sense. It's messy.
Yeah. I was wondering, how you got into studying these things in the first place, and also as a actually let's. I was going to ask a second part of that question, but I don't want to. I'll break it into two questions. So,
Okay.
how did you get into all of this? When did it start to interest you?
Interesting. Yes, there's quite a story to tell. I won't go into it in detail, but my original interest was originally at school. I was mainly interested in science and particularly chemistry. Really enjoyed that. I loved the way that chemistry revealed a hidden structure to the world, the way that all the different things around us could be were compounds of a certain number of basic elements. And I loved the periodic table. I thought it was the most marvelous um, insight into a hidden structure in nature. I loved that. But then I got ill later in my teens, and I wasn't able to pursue that, and so I spent quite a lot of time just alone reading. I read all sorts of things. I read a lot of literature and poetry, and I read some classics. I studied classics, but I got very interested in that. I got very interested in the arts and humanities side. But I also read philosophy. This was largely in a self-taught way, without formal supervision. Although I had some friends who advised me. But I read philosophy, and I think of all the. I still love literature and poetry and all these things, but I saw that philosophy kind of connected back to my original interest in science, because it was about, again, understanding the world and finding deeper patterns in there, which of course is, I guess, what poetry and literature does too. But philosophy particularly attracted me because it had this all-encompassing thing. It seemed that it enabled you to think about the deep insights that science was revealing, and perhaps even deeper ones. And of course, you could study it without needing to be in a lab and have all the equipment, which I didn't have. So, I read a lot of philosophy, and it's been quite a self-reflective person. By no means do I deny the existence of an inner world. That's why I live all the time in my own thoughts. I just don't think they're completely private. So I'd always been very reflective, and spent a lot of time thinking, introspecting and thinking about the nature of my own mind and so on. And so again, some work in philosophy of mind particularly came to seem like a focus. Like that really sort of ticked all the boxes, as it were. It was, you're getting scientific insight, you're getting insights that you could from the arts and humanities as well. They could shed light on the mind, and philosophy seemed to pull them together in a nice way. And then, of course, once you go into philosophy of mind, I didn't initially start working on consciousness. I started working on folk psychology, the nature of folk psychology and belief desire psychology, and topics like that. I was also interested in philosophy of language for a bit, but after a while, I saw that consciousness was really like the center of gravity for where I was going. And as soon as I started working on consciousness, I found I enjoyed it much more than other topics. And I felt that it was something where philosophers could really make a difference, because I felt scientists hadn't yet got this sorted out. And so I thought, yeah, here's somewhere where I can actually maybe, presumptive here, maybe make a difference to science without actually being a scientist. Which brings us back to the point, the previous point. No, that was a bit arrogant of me, a bit hubristic, but I think that's sort of the story. But then again, all of these are stories. Everything the idea that there's the self is, this is another point that Dan Dennett liked to make, that the self is a sort of narrative construction. Myself is the story I tell about me and my activities. So we can tell lots of stories there. I've just told you one story, but that was highly selective, and it was designed to have a certain narrative arc. And I could tell many other stories. That's not about me, about Keith. So that's not necessarily the correct, the authoritative one, but it's one, and it's got some basis in. It's maybe one maybe useful illusion about me.
Mm-hmm. No, and I really like how you like the periodic table, because now you really like maps of consciousness. So I can see that since a young person, since a young child, you had almost a similar incline to this kind of map. Another thing I really like about this is that you're thinking about it in a way where it's like, guys, if it's like it's like better resource allocation. Let's spend more time and energy towards this quantitative stuff that we can try and perhaps map in the future, or perhaps just things that we can actually make progress on, and then we can actually also help people more by understanding how consciousness works and how their brains work. When it comes to that ethical aspect of, okay, we can actually help more people, can you give me some examples? For instance, if I understand how someone's sad easier by studying consciousness, I can help them be less. But how does that look like? Can you give me like a couple of examples? I can't think of any.
Well, I think self-understanding is a wonderful, it's a very powerful thing. The more we understand about ourselves, about why we are the way we are, why I'm feeling. If I just, as I said earlier, if I just say I'm feeling sad, well, okay, you're feeling. Let's maybe take a little example. It's not sure how factually accurate this is, but it will do for our purposes. There's a condition where people it's called Capgras syndrome. I think it's I don't think the S is pronounced. Where it's a delusion some people suffer from. It's due to some. There's a neurological basis to it. They have the they have the false belief that a close relative, family member, or might be a partner, is an imposter. Like they think this person is not really my wife or my husband. They're a duplicate. They're an imposter, and they get very distressed by this. Naturally, and sometimes they become quite aggressive towards the imposter. Get out, bring back my husband or whatever. Now it seems, well, at least one explanation for this, may not. One explanation is that what's happened here is that they suffered some deficit to the areas of the brain that deal with emotional processing, that deal with generating affective reactions to faces, to people. But they haven't suffered any damage to the systems for detecting faces. So they recognize this person. The face recognition system says, yes, that's that person. That's your wife, your husband, or whatever. But the affective system doesn't have the usual response. They don't feel the way that they would normally do towards their partner. Okay. So they have this kind of conflict that it looks like them, but it doesn't make me feel like them. And the idea is they rationalize this by saying it's an imposter. Now, my thought is that I don't know how. I have no data on whether this actually helps. But I was, if I was suffering from that condition, which must be extremely distressing, and someone gave me that explanation, I would feel a bit more not happier about it. But
I'm not crazy completely. Like this,
I've got an understanding of what's happening. Yeah. This information can help me cope with it better. I would hope that it would have that effect. In general, the more you know about things, the more control you have. Knowledge is empowering. Knowledge about yourself is empowering. Okay? Understanding of your own consciousness, of your own reactions to things, it's empowering.
Makes it less scary too.
Less scary, indeed. Why am I feeling this way? Okay, maybe it's because of this and this. So that's the bottom line. For me, it's what was the focus of the question? I'm talking about how this can help people. Can it be therapeutic? So yes, I think it can. I think first of all, understanding is wonderful for its own sake. It's enriching, I think, understanding, and who knows how that will play out in different scenarios. Maybe having a particular bit of knowledge doesn't obviously help you, but you never know. But I think understanding how our minds work. I mean, what could be more therapeutic than that? As it were, you're no longer, as it were, the prisoner of your own brain. You're no longer. You can. We have. I'm a prisoner of your own brain. That's a very good phrase. But anyway, the thought is you can do, if you recognize that you have certain, say, behavioral tendencies that you don't approve of, you can do things, you can take actions to suppress them, to change them. You can try and develop new habits. Okay. If you understand the source of these behavioral responses, if you understand why they're occurring, and a psychological story helps you understand that, then you can adopt strategies. You can try and think of strategies to help you control them. The knowledge can build a meta level of control, and enable a meta level of control, which may be helpful both in cases where you have some problem, some disorder, but also just in everyday life. It may make you a more make you a better human being, better able to deal with the world, and also better able to deal with other people, because this is particularly important. You also be able to understand others better and understand why they are reacting as they do. That not just simply difficult or wicked or strange or whatever, but that it's a behavioral pattern that for understandable reasons has become entrenched, and which you can perhaps help them deal with, and help yourself deal with your own response to it. So I can't think of any more empowering thing than learning about how your own mind works.
No, this is great. This makes sense. And so, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on?
I can talk about all sorts of things. No, you ask me. Is there anything you would like to talk about? Anything left field? God was pretty left field, but I'm happy for other questions.
I was wondering if I know you are really inspired, and you really look up to Daniel Dennett.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any points where you guys had small differences, like technical differences in the way you understand consciousness?
I think perhaps one difference is that I do feel there's I think if you like, our dualistic intuitions, our intuitions that consciousness is something non-physical. I think perhaps I take them a bit more seriously than maybe than Dan did, and I think we need a more substantive explanation of them. We really do have to tell a story that people say there's a hard problem. They're not just sort of philosophically confused. It's not just that they've adopted a bad theory or got seduced by reading some philosophical papers. There's a deep intuition there that there's something real here that can't be accounted for by science. And the example I like to use is seeing an after image, like after you've looked at something blue, say fixated on something blue, and you look at a white wall, you see a yellow after image, or something violet, and you look at a white wall. And there seems to be there's a real yellowness there, damn it. And that yellowness isn't in the world, and it's not in your brain, so where the hell is it? And now that intuition is very, very powerful, and that needs a substantive story to explain. We have to explain how the trick is done. Now, Dan certainly speculated about this, and indeed my positive story that I was trying to talk about, reactivity, that is rooted in stuff that Dan said, but I don't think he developed that enough. He was more focused, I think, on explaining, on attacking the Cartesian conception of consciousness, and on developing a story that connected consciousness with language, with the role of language in fixing contents, making contents available. The important thing consciousness explained is the role of language in probing oneself and making, thereby programming oneself linguistically, asking oneself questions, and thereby promoting bits of perceptual content to not exactly to conscious, but giving them a higher neural influence, and therefore bringing them into the realm of what we call consciousness. But that didn't really address head-on the hard problem. I don't think we need to address the hard problem. I don't think there's a hard problem, but we need to address why we think there's a hard problem. And so I think I'm probably giving more emphasis to that, and that is the second part of the Illusionist project. The Illusionist project is explaining what consciousnness is, and explaining why we think that explaining what consciousness is and why we think it's something else. And I think that second point, perhaps I do more that I'm more focused on that side. I mean, there are lots and lots of differences, but I think Dan's work was so rich. The thing that I really liked about Dan's work was that it was not he wasn't formulating really precise and detailed theories. He was telling people where to look for the answers. All the time, he was, again, it was this engagement with science. He was saying, look, this is, look over here, investigate in that area, because that's my sense is that that's where the answers lie. He didn't say he had all the answers, but I think he had a really sure sense of where they were, of the regions where they were. And that's why he was interact so fruitfully with other scientists. And he was very, very happy for people to take up his ideas and run with them. I would often say to him, look, I'm going to use this example or this argument or whatever, and I'm not sure whether I've taken it from you or whether I thought of it myself. I really didn't know, because I knew his work so well. And he would say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Just go with it. If it works, it works. That's what matters. And I love that spirit of generosity. He was, I think, a very optimistic person. He believed that we could make sense of things, and that we could live together harmoniously if we would only try to understand each other better. And I find him inspiring in that way, in a way that I don't want to be critical of other philosophers. I'm happy for people to do whatever they want to. I think it's important to explore all routes. If they're not productive, that will become apparent. But I do feel that some philosophers like to sort of close off options rather than opening them up. Dan was a great opener up of options. And that's why I found him so inspiring. Yeah. I mean,
did you guys spend a lot of time? Did you guys spend a lot of time together, or was it more so reading each other's stuff or reading his stuff?
I'd known him. I first met him when I was at graduate school in the 90s, and we met occasionally. But it was in the last 10 years of his life that I got to know him particularly well. We were on a trip together in 2014, and we spent some time together. And after that, we had video calls and emails quite regularly, and we saw each other at. He came to visit here in Crete in I think 2018, visit with the family, and so I spent I was in email contact with him every other day maybe, and we spoke often. So yeah, I got quite close to him, and yeah, he was a huge influence on me.
And Michael Graziano was also telling me that he was influenced by him. He's certainly one of the biggest philosophers of our time.
He was a big personality. He was a big man. he was big-hearted. He was generous to. He could pick fights with self-important academics, but he was very generous to students, and I could tell a lot of stories about his generosity to up-and-coming people. And yes, he was perhaps one of the last of the really great philosophers. I think the way that philosophy is developing now, there isn't really scope for individuals to make such a dramatic contribution. And he was able to, I think, because he had such a wide range of interests. He drew on. He was very well informed about science, and also he was able to write remarkably well. He was able to do something that very few philosophers can, which is to write books that were both works of academic philosophy that were studied by fellow philosophers and were accessible to the general public. That's a very hard thing to do, to write stuff that combines that. And that, of course, is what I guess the great philosophers of the past, people like Hume or I was going to say Bertrand Russell, but not all of his work was accessible. But certainly they could talk to both audiences and write stuff for both audiences. Write work that was the same piece of work was addressed to both audiences, and I think we need a lot more of that. I think we need a more integrated culture. One thing that depresses me is the way that academia is not integrated with the rest of society properly. That academics are not talking to a much wider audience, or if they do, it's only through very simplified versions, almost sensationalized versions of their work. I mean, there's a place for that, but Dan was able to do stuff that wasn't sensationalized, that was serious philosophy. Like Consciousness Explained is a serious work of philosophy and a popular book. Darwin's Dangerous Idea, the same. Freedom Evolves. We need more people like that. It's hard.
I like podcasts for this reason, because
yes.
you can have people explain topics for hours. And then I especially like podcasts when one of the two people is stupid. So in this case, I'm the stupid one. And because I represent the general listener that will have a lot of questions that are really simple, and a lot of the time really, really well-read people might just not realize, they might not understand this. So it creates a really good dynamic between it bridges really well-read academics with the general public, and I feel that's kind of when I do this podcast, that's kind of the role I'm trying to adopt of the guy that doesn't really know that much about the topic and people can relate to, and then it's kind of people can use me as a vessel almost to reach out to academics and create this nice integration. And again, I completely agree. I think it's really hard to, on the one hand, create something that's really valuable to academics, and also on the other hand, not become too complicated for people that want to sit down to actually understand. And finding that balance, I think it's very special. And I think it also requires, I was talking to James York, and he was saying to me, like, the more you understand something as a scientist or as an academic, you can explain it a little bit more simply without oversimplifying it.
Yes.
And it's true. I teach martial arts. I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the things I know the most, I can explain really, really nice, simple system to a wide variety of things I don't really understand. It's this mushy, complicated thing that I haven't exactly found how the dots connect. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, I went on a bit on a monologue. I just wanted to share.
No, it was great. Fantastic. I agree totally with what you've just said. I think it's, and that's the podcast like this, like yours, these are things that give me, make me feel optimistic about academia. And I think, though, you did yourself a little disservice there in saying that you asked a simple question. It also takes an art to ask simple questions. And clearly you've done some preparation for this interview, and asking the right simple questions is itself requires skill. So don't diminish your own role here. But I completely agree about the other point, that it's very easy to, as an academic, to get into something and to sort of learn the technical vocabulary and to learn how to move the pieces on the chessboard, as it were, how to play the game, but still not have a really deep insight into how, I guess, the technique, what do I want to say? The dynamics of the game. Okay, so you're making the moves, but you're not really a skilled chess player yet. And I think for a lot of academics are in that position, and indeed I'm in that position with many things, perhaps with everything. But it's only once you get through that and you begin to see the bigger picture, you begin to see the underlying structures in the game, that you can be really helpful to others to bring them in. You've got to give them some insight, and that, as you say, does involve simplifying. It's not just a matter of saying, "Oh, look, follow these rules, follow this opening, and you will have a good position in the chess." You need to know why that opening was the right one to choose at that point. Why are you following that opening? Why are you making this variation on it? It can't be done by simply following the rules. You have to have you have to really inhabit the position, and have tried explaining it to many different audiences in many different contexts. And only that way only when you do that do you really begin to understand it yourself and begin to see the strengths and weaknesses of it. All positions have strengths and weaknesses, and it's too easy just to play the game without and this interaction, it does force you to try to see the deeper patterns. That's the deeper patterns.
You're exposing your ideas,
yes,
and then by exposing your ideas evolve to something better because different people will see it in a different way. They will ask you different questions. You're forced
exactly.
to think of it in different ways, and then, well, you just have yourself a better theory than the one you used to have. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's a mistake to think that process can only happen within academia, that it's only by getting other academics to comment on your work that you can make progress. I think talking to people who are not specialists, but who are smart and ask penetrating questions, can often be more use, because those other people the other academics are just playing the same game. They're just following the same rules. But sometimes maybe you need to bend the rules. You need to. I'm not sure how this metaphor works out. I'm not sure the chess metaphor will work. But sometimes it's not just a matter of playing the game. Sometimes you need to ask yourself, am I playing the right game? Is this the game we should be playing at all? Another academic often won't tell you that because they're committed to playing this game, and so you just keep making moves in it. But it's maybe get someone outside will say, well, maybe what if you change the rules a bit? What if you and indeed the rules of games like chess have evolved. What if you didn't have that rule? And besides, if what academics are doing is important, it's important to share it. Of course, not all knowledge is easily shareable knowledge. I guess in pure mathematics, but you need to have done a lot of study in order to understand it. But much of academic knowledge is quite accessible to a wider audience if you put in the effort. It's hard to make it accessible without caricaturing it, without sensationalizing, but it can be done. And if you think that what you're doing is important, that's something that you really should be doing. Knowledge that isn't shared is just dead.
Yes, I think fresh perspectives are really important when it comes to solving problems. I'm going to mention again, when I was talking to James York, he was talking to me about how his interest is applying what he knows in chaos theory and applying
Mm-hmm.
mathematics into different subjects that he finds interesting, and a lot of the time that can bring a lot of innovation. And also another example that I've talked about before on this podcast once, but it's worth mentioning, is Erdin Schrödinger has a book, What is Life,
Mm-hmm.
which is a biology book predominantly, and he was one of the most famous physicists. And in the preface, he says, sometimes people have to take risks of making fools of themselves by
Mm-hmm.
trying to apply what they know from one field to another
Mm-hmm.
field. And that book is one of the most famous biology books, because he with a lot less knowledge of biology than obviously his great knowledge in physics, was able to apply a lot of ideas that require in biology, that require the perspective that the biologists didn't have. And it does not because they're not clever, it's just because if you spend so many years looking at things from a particular angle, then a different perspective often helps. So yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's why communication between different fields is so important.
Mm-hmm.
People talking to each other from different fields and interacting and kind of which is unfortunately something that I found a little bit negative of academia, is, okay, we create this separation of fields because it helps us structure
Mm-hmm.
knowledge a little bit, but because of that separation, then we miss out a little bit on the connections between these fields, because at the end of the day, it is this separation of knowledge and this kind of classification of it in subjects is something that we did. It's not like physics is physically separated from chemistry. So
Yeah.
it's important to remember that. I was reading Donella Meadows' book, I think it's called Systems. We did a book review podcast too with one of my neuroscience friends on it. Systems thinking in systems. That's what it was called. And she was talking about the fundamental things that are important in systems is the individual elements. So if we think about, for instance, knowledge, and we make it's many ways to make this out, but let's say we make a map and it's like physics and chemistry and biology and math and whatever. She says, yes, the individual elements are really important, but the connections between those elements are as important. And so I think we definitely don't spend enough time in academia focusing on those connections as much as we should. Anyway, sorry again, I'm rambling, but it's just
No,
adding
I agree
some thoughts.
totally.
Adding
I think
some
that's
thoughts.
absolutely right. I think, and I think making fools of ourselves, I think we should be very ready to make fools of ourselves. That's how progress is made. That's what, that's how evolution works. It works through trying things at random and seeing which one succeeds. And ultimately, that's the only source of design in the world. And that's how intellectual progress is made, by people trying out ideas and seeing which one fits, seeing which one works, seeing which one gets some purchase on the subject. And I'm very keen. Academics, I don't think the culture of academia encourages people to make fools of themselves. It's a bit too
almost
competitive.
Scary. It's like, you should, like, and I see this a lot. With my colleagues at school, they're afraid to not know something.
Yes.
They're afraid.
Yes.
And when I go to seminars at school, we have seminars every week, I just ask about your questions. I don't really care. And this is not a story to make me look good. It's just, I've realized that, I'm going to reference for the last time James York, but I think we talked a lot about it with him too, on the podcast I had with him. That's why I'm mentioning him. He says, you can either look stupid or you can actually be stupid. And I think I agree. I think, well, you can pretend that you know things, or you can not ask the question and, pretend you're smart, or you can actually say, you know what, there's nothing wrong. I'm not a bad person because I don't know the answer to this. There's so much knowledge out there. I'm definitely not going to know everything, and I might as well just ask. And well, that's really important, and it's a shame. I don't know, and I think without wanting to. I don't like blaming people, but I do see some teachers since a young kid that they punish you for not knowing,
Yeah.
and you can see it even like in the vocabulary teachers use. It's
Yes.
like, and sometimes it's necessary. Like, I'm not saying you, like, if you want to be a doctor, you have to know certain things. I'm not like denying that, but I feel like it cultivates a culture of fear if you're
Yes.
using phrases such as, let me think, like, good, like, if a teacher comes in class and it's like, you should have known this by now, it's unacceptable. And I'm like, this is not helping people ask more questions. And definitely they should know this eventually if they, let's say they want to be a doctor or they want to do this specific thing. But I think, yeah, and I think it's counterproductive. And
I agree. It's encouraging people to conceal their ignorance rather than correct it.
Mhm.
I hope that maybe I've done my bit at removing the. I mean, I've done a lot of podcast interviews, and many of them I look back at them and well, I can't watch them again because I think, oh, that was I expressed myself so badly. I got that wrong. That was so stupid. And and I feel so. But I hope maybe that will maybe be an example to people. They can think, well, look, he wasn't afraid to make a fool of himself. And that's well documented in all these interviews. So maybe that will encourage other people to not be afraid, because
it's the only way forward. Anyway,
it is.
it's the only way forward.
I agree.
Do you have your own YouTube channel?
I do, yes, where I mainly link to interviews that I've done, and also some podcasts that I've recorded myself, and the ones that I did with Philip Goff, the Mind Chat ones. Yes, if you search for Keith Frankish on YouTube,
I'll put it on
the
I'll put it on the description too.
Yeah, thanks.
We're towards the end of the podcast. I just want to ask you, what's next for you then? So, in terms of work, in terms of, well, ambition and kind of your mission in this stage of your life when it comes to the things we've talked about, kind of promoting them. What's next for you?
Well, I have a few projects actually that I'm working on that are still at quite an early stage, and I don't want to jinx them by saying too much about them yet. So maybe those are things that perhaps in a year or so, we could talk about if you want to have me back. But I don't want to go into those too much. But I have got several projects in the larger scale projects that I'm working on, book projects essentially. But I'm also keen to try doing a bit of creative writing. I've always, as I said, I spent a lot of time reading literature as a child, and I always felt that really the creative writers somehow they had an importance that the academics didn't have, because they were really creating something. They were really adding something to culture rather than just solving problems. And so I have a hankering to try a bit of that. So other than that, I'm just trying to keep myself going and deal with the challenges of getting older. And and also trying to find causes for optimism, I think, in a world where there are many causes for the opposite. But what you've been saying about the role of podcasts, that is one thing that gives me encouragement. It's great that I've been able to sit here for well over 2 hours now talking to you. We've not met before, and we've had, I've enjoyed it anyway. I
I
think we've had a
loved
really
it.
interesting
It was
conversation. And you're in London. I think you're in London, are you? You're in the I'm Brighton, right? And I'm here in Heraklion, and we've sat talking to each other. We've had this conversation. It's been recorded. Hopefully, other people will find it enjoyable. Yes, that's a really wonderful thing that I think modern technology enabled us to do. I mean, there are so many podcasts; it's impossible to keep up with them. But one can sample them, and whatever sparks your interest, there's so much to find. This is a really positive thing. I think if you go back before the internet, if you wanted to hear an academic speak, there were only two options. One is to physically get into their classroom or their lecture theatre, or perhaps hope that they would record something for television, which happened very rarely. And similarly, if you wanted to read a journal article, you had to actually get physically into the library and find the copy of the journal and take it to the photocopier and whatever. But now all this is much more accessible to a wider audience. Informationally, we've never been richer. I mean, of course, this is swamped by all kinds of rubbish, including AI-generated rubbish. But the resources have never been more wide. The knowledge resources have never been more widely available, and that's a really positive thing. And if we can just develop the means of being selective and using them wisely, these riches that are available to us, then I think we've got a chance. I'm not sure that traditional educational institutions are really doing a good job in this respect. Maybe in the end it is going to be down to a more democratic, more anarchistic form of education, where it is individuals like yourself who are spreading knowledge and fantastic. Let's keep doing that. So yeah, there are reasons to be able to, and that's one thing I want to keep trying to be in my old. I don't want to get cynical and start turning away from the modern world.
I think it's something to do with self-directed learning that plays a bit of a role when it comes to why people find these things enjoyable too. I think definitely a conversational tone helps people find things more interesting. But I have had a lot of lecturers that have a conversational tone. I think what makes the difference is I can pause a video whenever I want, so I can control the when I'm gonna do something, and I can also control the what, so I can change topics when I'm on YouTube. Whereas in a lecture, you're kind of stuck, and
yes,
and I think these things play a really big role. And another thing that I think is important now is for people to be able to navigate how they use, let's say, YouTube as a platform, because it's a little bit of a jungle. I was listening to Yuval Harari talk to Mark Zuckerberg. I was listening to it quite a while ago, and they were discussing a little bit about this. And well, let's say you wanna use YouTube to learn about certain topic. Maybe you wanna learn about Plato's Republic.
Mm-hmm.
The way the algorithm works is, let's say you search Plato's Republic every day as in the search engine, and then you do that for maybe, I don't know, 20 days in a row, and then the 21st day you search you were a bit tired, you searched of, I don't know, cat videos. The problem with the algorithm is suddenly you just have cat videos, so it's just going to push the thing that sells the most to you. So it's a little bit of a jungle in terms of understanding the nature of the algorithm and being a little bit careful, understanding that also our biology is going to make us susceptible to, perhaps, because for me YouTube is such an amazing educational platform. I have tons of playlists on YouTube of well, I have a bunch of books that are just free on YouTube. I have a bunch of podcasts that I find really valuable. I also have a bunch of university lectures that are just recorded, and so I have these playlists on, but it takes a tremendous Cal Newport is someone that talks about digital minimalism and talks about how to navigate these things well. But I think if humans can find a way to overcome this obstacle, then things like YouTube have already had an impact on educating people, but can have a more positive impact too. But I think that's an obstacle as a society that we have to figure out.
I agree completely. I there's a potential here, I think, for a really productive use and constructive use of AI. Not AI controlled by big corporations, but a more distributed form of AI. I mean, any LLM, you can run an LLM on your own, on a sufficiently powerful personal computer, and you can configure it and control it yourself, open source. I see the possibility here to using this technology to filter and to help us, fight back against the algorithm with our own algorithms. AI, a more distributed form of it, not the one which is controlled by the big tech corporations and so on, and is tuned up to suit their interests now, but one which is under our control. I think, again, talk about empowerment. I think that the internet is overwhelming. It's 99% of it is of no value at all. Finding that 1% and finding that fraction of the 1% that you particularly want. If we can have control of AI systems that can help us do that, it could be incredibly enriching. So a lot of people I know are very pessimistic, skeptical, cynical about AI, and they have good reasons, especially the way that it's currently owned and controlled and used to manipulate people. But the technology itself really is quite amazing. And it's a matter of getting it under more democratic control and using it more constructively. And it could be that is the way people can fight back against the algorithm and against the information overload. It could be empowering. It could be our personal both a protection and a means of exploration. Anyway, I was trying to be optimistic.
No, that's a fascinating thing. I'm definitely gonna spend time thinking about it. Me and my neuroscience friend Finn, we're learning how to code on weekends when we have free time.
Oh, fantastic!
So that's a great project for me to suggest to him. We try to figure out. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about this new technology. It is very dangerous, but it also has the possibility of being democratized in a way that say nuclear technology couldn't. That was very dangerous, but and it couldn't be democratized. It had to be under control of states or at least huge organizations. This technology, you couldn't build a nuclear bomb in your bedroom. You can build an AI in your bedroom. You can build an LLM in your bedroom. You can download a model and run it on your own computer. So I think the possibility for using this technology for good is definitely there. At least we need to hold out the hope that it is.
Thank you so much for the conversation. If I go on holiday in the summer, I'll come to Irakli and we can do an episode in person too.
Oh, that would be nice.
Yeah, that would be really nice. I don't really go on holidays. I just study and train. But that might be a productive holiday.
That would be lovely. There were many beautiful places around the city to sit and have a coffee and talk. It's
and I've never been anywhere in Greece besides Athens and Thessaloniki, so that would also be something of.
Well, Irakli's the next place on the list. I think it's the third biggest city, so it's the obvious place to come. If you don't know Crete, you must come and explore Crete. It's a wonderful island.
I turned down coming to Crete twice in my life. Once as a teenager with school because I was too busy, I don't know, going to the gym or something. I always get obsessed over things and then I just stay there. And then the second time, last year, my friend was getting married in Crete and I was studying for my exams, which was the right call that I stayed. But I think this is my third call. I think I might
third time lucky.
Yeah.
Third time lucky. I'll be happy to welcome you.
Sir, thank you so much for the podcast. I tremendously enjoyed it. And I was particularly towards the end, I I found it really enjoyable that we went on a tangent to talk a little bit about education and stuff like that. Yeah, and I will speak to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyriakos. It's been a huge pleasure. I've enjoyed the last 2.5 hours. So I hope your viewers will enjoy it too.
I'm sure they will. All the best, sir. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, guys.